Hey everyone, I hope you are well. Today I'll be showing you how to set up your IDE to start with Rust plugin development and go over the basic structure of Oxide plugins and the different command types you can run and how you can use them. And whether you're a beginner or just need a refresher, this guide will go through and the different videos will explain the different steps on how to make an Oxide plugin. The first big step you need to take in your development journey is deciding which IDE you want to use for writing Rust plugins. Rust plugins are based in C#, so you need an IDE that can handle C# code and development. I personally use JetBrains Rider. There's other options like Visual Studio Code or just Visual Studio, but personally I prefer JetBrains Rider, and it's also now a free software you can get, so it's just as good and it's a viable option for anyone just getting started. I will be adding download links for all the IDEs you could use, the ones I would recommend, such as Visual Studio Code, and JetBrains Rider. In this tutorial video, I'll be using JetBrains Rider for my setup, but if you have any questions about any specific IDE, I will try and assist you in the comments. So let's hop right into it. So let's get started with making a solution and start our plugin development journey. So our new solution, you can use the solution name, which can be anything. For this purposes, I'll just do Rust tutorial. We'll preset it up, make sure your target framework is the latest and language is set to C# with a class library. Should hop you right into it. So this would be your workstation, your class.cs, and let's get started by just renaming this. The first step into starting to program Rust plugins would be getting your dependencies set up. Now your dependencies will be accessing the Oxide code references and the framework, and will be accessing the physical game framework to allow you to actually access the Rust server and allow to run your plugin on the server. To get your dependencies, which will be required to make Oxide plugins in Rust, you would need to get a Rust server running to get a certain folder. So here's just another server I have over here. On files, RustDedicatedData managed. Inside the managed folder is everything you will require. I will have a download link for the latest ones in the description of this video, but as new stuff comes out and this video gets older, it might not be up to date with the latest DLLs, so I would recommend getting the latest version when you're working on a new project. So let's get started on actually adding our dependencies. So you can right click on the dependencies, reference, add from, and then go to RustDedicatedData managed, and then you copy everything underneath those folders and click open. And you just give it a slight second so it can add all the references, and there you go. When you go into references and assemblies, you'll see it's all there. Just a tip, if you're using Visual Studio, you cannot select all of them at once. It will bug out and it will give you hundreds of errors and it will scream at you. I do not know why. So what I usually do when adding dependencies for Visual Studio is I select like 10 at a time until I have everything added. It's a bit tedious, but it's the best way to ensure that everything gets added and there won't be any issues in your code. Okay, now we will go into what is the bare minimum you need for an Oxide plugin to run. So firstly, all Oxide plugins, when a plugin gets loaded on the server, it will check the namespace and make sure it's referenced to oxide.plugins. This will make sure that the file gets read properly and the Rust server knows what to do with it. Now the bare minimum you need for a plugin is an info. This will just autofill for me, so you need the title, just for this purposes as Rust tutorial, author, your name or whatever you need to put in for the author, and a version number. So this would be version number 1 for an example. And then you need to define your class. So I have a public class, Rust tutorial, and then you need to make the next decision. So there's two different options. There's a Rust plugin, which will be anything related directly to Oxide Rust. So any direct features and references will be in there. Or you can do another thing called covalence. A covalence plugin. because Oxide is not a Rust specific framework. It has a Rust specific function to it, but if you go into Covalence plugin, you get access to the modding framework of Oxide in all games. But because this is a Rust specific video, we'll just go with Rust. So this is the bare minimum basic structure for an Oxide plugin in Rust. This won't do anything, but it will load onto your server and it will show as loaded. But you want your code to actually do something, so let's do the most basic thing you can do. Void init. So this will basically call when the plugin is loaded and run some function. So let's just, to get started, a puts function that says Rust tutorial initialized. So this will print in our console whenever the plugin's loaded that the plugin is loaded. Now, firstly, you need to get some references to your dependencies just to make sure that everything will run. So just at the top, you can type using Oxide for plugins, using collections, generic, and using Unity engine. These will be in gray for now as we are not directly using this, but I just like having them in the beginning so you don't have any issues with stuff not loading in the future. So this is the more basic structure, and we'll show you a console message when you load the plugin. So let's test this out. So you can save the plugin, you can go to your server, files, Oxide, plugins, you can drag, just do it like this, just drag it right into your Oxide plugins folder, go to your console, and there you go. It says Rust tutorial was compiled successfully, and then here you see Rust tutorial. This is a reference to our plugin, and it printed Rust tutorial initialized, which is exactly what we wrote right here. So as you can see, this is the bare structure, and it did something physically on the server. To get started, we'll talk about some basic command structures you can set up to actually work with your code in game and do specific functions. So there's different ones like a chat command, which you can type with a / command, a console command, which you can type in your F1 menu, and then there is permission-based commands, which work on a permission system, which we will get into later. So let's get started with a basic chat command. So the structure for a chat command is defining it as a chat command, and for the purposes, we'll just make it hello. So whenever someone types /hello, the next thing will be initialized. So this is what I like about Rider. It will almost always basically fill everything you need for it. So basically it's a private void with the base player. So this is who ran the command, this is the command and the arguments in the command. So now, when someone runs hello, this code block will get executed. So let's respond to the player. So we go player.chat message. Hello, player display name. So this will respond with hello and the player's name. So let's save this code and run it on our server real quick and to see if it works. You can see, started the compiler, Rust tutorial initialized, loaded plugin. So the plugin did not fail and it compiled completely, meaning there's no issues in the code and everything is nice. So now let's try it in game. Alright, now that we're on our server and the plugin is loaded successfully, let's see if our command works. /hello. Hello gamer, it says. So it will get the display name of the player and respond with that. So if my name was I'm very good at Rust, I promise, it would say hello, I am very good at Rust, I promise. The next type of command we will be looking at is a console command. So this would be console command hello for the same reasons. Then a private void console command system.arg and the argument. So this would be a slightly different format as a chat command, because this would be run on the console itself. So this could be if the player is in game or not. So let's get to the code block and just add some functionality. So because this is a console system arg, you can't reply directly unless you go into arg.player and get it from there. But let's, for the purposes of this video, just make a broadcast. You go to server.broadcast hello world. So whenever someone types hello, the server will respond with hello world. Let's test this code out and see if it works. Okay, now that we're in game again, let's see if this works. So in theory, when someone types hello, it would respond with hello world. Now this is a broadcast, so everyone on the server will be able to see this. This is a player chat message, meaning only the player who ran the command will see this. This is the difference between the two. Now let's make some slight modifications to the console command. Let's say you don't want to broadcast your message to the entire server, you want to do a specific player. So then we'll have to initialize a player it will respond to. So that would be base player equal to arg.player. So it will get the argument that was ran and the player who ran it. Now you have to add a check, because if someone adds in the server console hello, there obviously will not be a player involved and your code will break. So now you have to check if player equals null and return. So this will just ensure that when the console command is ran, it will not break the plugin if it wasn't initialized by a player. So now we can go player.chatMessage hello display name. Now let's run this code. Okay, now that we're in game again, we can test it out. Hello Kevin. So you can see it now initialized the player and it responded to me. This will not be seen by other players, and this is specific to the player alone. Now this is only possible because we had those checks. Now if we go into the server itself, if we type hello, you'll see nothing happens. That's because we have the check over here that checks if it was a player that sent the message. If not, it assumes it's the console and it will just return and not do anything. Now let's look at taking arguments from a chat command, because let's say you want to say /hello and then the amount of times I want to say hello or something like that. So then you have to add a little check. It says if args.length is equal to 0, then this code block will run, which will basically just say player.chatMessage. We won't be doing colors because that's a bit fancy. We'll be doing that right now. That just says usage hello and then a message, because now you're accepting an argument into this. So you don't want to type just hello, you want it to do something with arguments afterwards. So this will just ensure that someone actually adds arguments. If not, it will just have arguments is 0, and then anything you do with the arguments will break, and it will just add a lot of trouble into your code. So now let's start actually working with the arguments. So string message args. Now we'll do it a different way just so it's more easier to understand. So the string.join args. So this will take all our args and add it into a string message. So then we can add a player message that says player.chatMessage message. So this will respond with what they responded with. Now let's run the code. Okay, now that we're in game again and we messed with a chat command, it should be /hello. Now look what happens when you type /hello and there's no arguments installed. It will say usage hello space message. Now let's see how it works if you add an argument. it prints hello world. The next step into your chat command journey would be permission checks. Because you sometimes have a command you only want certain players to be able to run, or admins on the server, or anything like that. So you would have to add a permission check to your chat command to ensure that not just everyone can use it. So firstly, to get a permission check, you need to have a permission on the server. So we can go back to our initialization and do permission.register permission. It will auto-filled it for me, browser-tutorial.use. Now you can call this anything, so let's just for this purposes call it help.use. And the owner would be this plugin. So this would register on initialization this Oxide permission to your plugin. So now if you go into a command like your chat command over here, you can add a check. So if permission.user has permission.name, for this purposes we'll just call it help.use. So this would check if the player ran the command has the permission help.use. If the player does not have the permission, this code block will return. So let's do a player.chat message that says you do not have permission to use this command. And then we just return to ensure that nothing else gets executed in this code block. Now, if the user has the permission, this will get ignored and the command will function as normal. So let's test this out in game and see how it functions. So now that we're in game again, we can test out our new permission-based plugin. We type hello, it says you do not have permission to use this command because I do not have the permission. Now to add a user to permission, you can do oxide.grant username, and my username would be gamer, or you can use a Steam 64-bit ID and then just assign it help.use. I forgot to define user, apologies. So this would be user or an Oxide group. There's plenty of tutorials on how to use Oxide groups and permissions. I will not be going into details on how to use it, but this would be how you just add a permission to a player. The player gamer has been granted the permission help.use. So now when I type hello, you see it says hello message. Doesn't that look familiar? Because I didn't add an argument. So now hello text. As you can see, it printed test to the player. So as you can see, this is a basic permission check, and this is how you do permissions for your plugins. Now remember, you have to register the permission on initialization, otherwise there will be no permission on the Oxide side and it will not function. Now the next thing you would be looking at is having a default configuration set up for your Oxide plugin. Now, so you can see over here we have a bunch of things like you do not have permission to use this command, or usage, hello message, or anything like that, and you want to be able to set that dynamically via an config and not directly in the code. So this would be for any larger code bases where you want stuff to be done dynamically, so you don't have to manually type each message. You will need a config. So firstly, to make a config, you need to define a private. Let's call it plugin config, and then config. Now, as you can see, it's red. So you need to go to show outfix, and you see, it says create a type. What's wrong? Oh, I need to define the class. Private class, and then let's do plugin config. And in the plugin config, this will be everything that's in our config. So let's do a public string, and then let's call it welcome message get set, and then define it as equal to something. Define it equal to something. So let's say this is our welcome message. So welcome to RustDedicatedData. Now, how would you access this this config? How would you save this config? And how will you make sure this config is loaded? So let's go to next, do a protected override. Void. Now this would be load default config, and then in there you'll type config equals new plugin config, and then save config. So this would load the default config if there is no configuration set for it. So let's say you're first initializing your plugin, there obviously will not be a config folder, and so it will automatically make a config folder for you and add this string into it. Now, if you want to load a config that's already been set, you do protected override void load config. And then in here, you basically do base load config, and then config equals read-only object rust config. And you can add in here, just to make it better, define what it is, new plugin config. So, and now finally, you'll need to be able to save your config. So we can add a protected override void save config up, autofill automatically. So you do save config, config.write object config. So this will make sure our config gets saved. And now that we're in game, let's test in our config. So let's do hello 1. 1 is just the basic arg. We're not passing args, but it is a requirement because of that statement we made earlier. So let's try it. Welcome to the server. As you can see, it gave us the welcome message we set in our config. Now let's say we want to change this. So we can go to files, Oxide, then you go to config, and then you'll see our Rust tutorial.json right here. In here, welcome message, welcome to the server. So let's change this to something, hello world, and save content, and then reload our plugin. So oxide.reload, and then Rust tutorial, plugin name. There you go. It unloaded. This, don't worry too much about that. That's just because there's no unload. So don't worry too bad about that. So as you can see, it reloaded our plugin. So if we do /hello1, it now says hello world. Okay, now you know how to do chat commands, console commands, and setting up a basic config. But now, the next question is, how do we mix these? How do we change the config with a command? It's actually pretty simple. So we'll go to our chat command again and do a little bit of changes. So you'll see we have a message here. So let's, instead of displaying config.welcome message, we display the message again. And then we do this. So we type config.welcome message is equal to message, and then config.save. Save config, apologies. So now, every time someone does hello and the argument, it will display the message they sent as the argument, and it will change this message to whatever their message was. And it will actually save it in our file system, and it will stay there. So this would be for if you want to have chat commands to control your config from in-game. So the next thing you'll be looking at in your Rust plugin journey would be looking at Oxide hooks. Oxide hooks is things that are called in your code when a certain event happens in-game. Now you can find them on the uMod API. I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video so you can have a look, and all these specific things that can happen. We'll specifically be looking at something we can check. So on player attack. So this will get called every time a player tries to attack. So let's copy this code and paste it in. So every time a player attacks, it will just put in console on player attack works, just so you know the hook works, and return null. So it won't do anything about the physical attack, it will just log it for us. Now let's say you want to stop someone from attacking. Well then, instead of returning null, you can return false. So now every time a player attacks, it will cancel the attack and he will do no damage. So let's test this out in game. And now that we're in game, we can go test to see if our on-player attack works. As you can see, you cannot damage anything on the server. Now, this would be a useful feature with regards to if you want to stop specific players from attacking, or you want to have a certain command that will prevent players from unintentionally breaking structures. So let's look on how you can use this work further. And now that we're back in our code, we can do a permission-based system for can attack. So let's do permission.register permission, and then let's call it can attack .use. So this would register permission can attack on the Oxide system. So now we can check if we have the permission. So down here, on player attack. This base player is called attacker in this function. So you just have to do attacker.useID to string, and then can attack.use. So if the player doesn't have this permission, it just will return null. So this function would do anything if the player does not have this permission. If the player does have this permission, it will return false and they cannot attack. So let's test this code out in game real quick. Let's see. Oh, look, I can break it now. But let's say I should not be able to break it. So now we just register the permission to the player and attack.use. I can't spell to save my life. And attack.use grants permission can attack.use. And as you can see, I can no longer damage. And then as soon as I revoke this, I can damage it once again. So let's go through what you've learned in this tutorial. So you've learned how to set up your IDE to code Rust plugins. You've learned the basic format into making a Rust plugin. You've learned configs, you've learned messages, and you've learned how to use hooks and permissions. Now this is the basic bare metal you need to get into starting to make Rust plugins. I will be making more tutorials in the future about more specific things. If you have something you want me to cover or something you want me to talk about or help you with, you can drop it down in the comment section, and if it's something that a lot of people want me to cover, I will cover it, and I'll probably be doing some projects in future and maybe even running through how I do these projects and my thought process behind it and some nice cool things you can try. Now, I do highly recommend using the Rider IDE, as I have used basically every IDE under the sun in my journey into learning Rust plugins. And I would say Rider was the easiest for me, as its autocomplete is amazing and half the time it knows what I want to do before I know how to do it or know what I want to do. So if you need any assistance further, please reach out and I'll see you guys next time.